There is a hill that rises behind the pine line, tucked between two winter-bitten ridges, where the wind always moves slow, as if careful not to wake something that should stay sleeping. And on that hill, there is a cabin. It's not much of a thing. Slanted roof, chimney leaning just enough to concern a stranger, and a door that sags at the hinge like it gave up arguing with the cold. The porch creaks, the floorboards inside moan sometimes, even when no one's walking. But the fire is always lit. Silas kept it that way. Had done for years. He didn't light it for guests. There hadn't been any in 3 winters. He didn't light it for company, because most folks had stopped visiting once the path up the hill got too thick with snow and silence. And he didn't light it for warmth. Not really, not just for warmth. He lit it because sometimes people lose things, and a fire helps you remember what it felt like to be found. The hill had once looked down on a coast road, back when Silas was younger and the ocean hadn't yet retreated from this part of the map. He used to man a beacon tower there, a solitary light to guide ships that only ever passed once in a while. It suited him, watching, waiting, staying ready even when no one came. When the sea went quiet, he climbed higher, took what was left of his gear, some salvaged beams, and built the cabin himself. Said less than 10 words a week after that. But every evening, he lit the fire. Then came the knock. It was late, just after a storm had scoured the ridge clean and left the trees wearing coats of ice. The wind had settled, sky cracked open, and stars spilled down like someone had finally remembered to look up. Silas was pouring the last of his coffee into the tin cup he kept warm on the stone hearth when he heard it. Knock. Not loud, not frantic, just steady. Like someone who didn't expect to be welcomed but knocked anyway. Because sometimes that's all hope can manage. Silas didn't rush. He never did. He set the tin down, grabbed the lamp, moved toward the door with slow boots and slower breath. When he opened it, the wind didn't howl, it stepped aside. There, on the porch, stood a child, maybe 10, maybe 12, face half hidden beneath a too thin hood. Coat soaked through, eyes black as the spruce behind him. He didn't speak. Silas didn't either. He just stepped aside. The child hesitated, then entered without a word. He left wet prints on the wood floor, mud mixed with ice, and steam rose from his shoulders like smoke from an old chimney. Silas shut the door, latched it gently, then hung the boy's coat by the stovehook and handed him a wool blanket that had seen 20 winters and survived them all. The boy wrapped it tight, sat on the floor near the fire like it was the first warm thing he'd touched in months. Maybe it was. "You hungry?" Silas asked, his voice low, rough from disuse. The boy nodded. Silas ladled stew from the pot. Root vegetables, barley, whatever was left from yesterday. He set the bowl on the table, then fetched a chunk of hard bread softened with steam. The boy climbed into the chair like it was sacred. He didn't grab or gobble. He just sat there a moment, staring at the steam curling off the bowl like he was afraid it might vanish. "You don't need to eat fast," Silas said. "There's more where that came from." Still, the boy took only a small spoonful, chewed slow, eyes wide. Silas didn't ask his name, didn't ask where he'd come from, didn't need to. When the bowl was empty, the boy pushed it forward slightly, then said, voice thin as breath, "Thank you." And that was that. Silas laid out a cot by the fire, placed the extra quilt near it, and turned down the lamp until only the embers glowed. "I don't lock doors," he said. "You're safe here." The boy didn't nod, but his shoulders softened, just a little. Silas stepped outside, pretending to check the sky. The stars blinked back like they weren't ready to sleep either. He didn't know what had brought the boy, but something told him this wasn't a mistake. And inside, the fire kept burning. The boy didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. He didn't ask to. Silas didn't ask why. Outside, the snow rose like breath held too long. It curled over the roof, drifted into the corners of the fence, and wrapped the world in silence. Even the birds had stopped arguing in the trees. It was the kind of winter that blanketed sound, thought, and time itself. Inside, things moved slowly. Silas kept the fire going, just like always. But now, he kept an extra log beside the hearth, smaller, lighter, easier for smaller hands. The boy didn't speak much. But on the second day, he picked up that log without being told and placed it gently in the stove. No words, just action, a gesture. That was how they spoke. Through actions. On the third morning, Silas left a slice of bread and a jar of jam on the table. The bread was hard. The jam, from summer berries long gone, was almost crystallized. The boy didn't touch it at first. Just stared. Silas didn't rush him. He knew there were people who ate quickly because they feared the food would vanish. But there were others, people who didn't eat not because they weren't hungry, but because they weren't sure they deserved warmth, or sweetness, or rest. By the time Silas returned with more kindling, the jam was gone. The bread remained. Half of it, anyway. That evening, the boy sat nearer to the fire than before. Not close, just nearer. Like his body was remembering something it didn't know how to ask for. On the fourth day, the storm passed. Sky turned from lead to ash. Then ash to soft pearl blue. Sunlight, shy and golden, tiptoed through the window cracks like a long-lost friend unsure if it was still welcome. Silas stood on the porch, sipping coffee. The boy appeared beside him. Silent. No coat, just the same too thin shirt and a blanket draped like a cape. Cold out, Silas said. The boy nodded. Silas looked at him, really looked. The boy had a scar across one knuckle, a shoe that didn't match the other, and eyes that seemed older than either of them. Not old with knowledge, old with waiting. You wanna feed the chickens? The boy blinked. Silas pointed toward the co-op. Corn's in the sack by the shed. If you want. The boy didn't answer. But 5 minutes later, Silas heard the soft crunch of boots over frost. And the chickens, clucking like someone had finally remembered they mattered. By the end of the week, they had a routine. Wake up, stir the fire, boil water, eat what could be chewed without too much effort. Let the kettle whistle, even when no one felt like drinking. The boy started helping more. He swept the floor, not because it was dirty, but because it gave his hands something to do. He dried the spoons and placed them in a neat line, always 4. Even though there were only 2 of them. And sometimes, when he thought Silas wasn't looking, he hummed, off-key, quiet, a small tune with no name. Silas never said a word. One night, the boy asked a question. It came after a long silence. The kind that wrapped itself around the cabin like a second quilt. Do you lock the barn? Silas paused, set his mug down. No. The boy's voice was careful. Ever? No need, Silas said. Nothing in there wants to run away. The boy looked into the fire. His lips moved like he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. He just sat back in the chair and pulled the blanket closer. Silas didn't press. Some things, he'd learned, need to come out in their own time, or not at all. Spring was still months away. But the light stayed longer each evening. On the 9th morning, the boy left the front door open just a little, enough for the smell of pine to sneak in. Silas watched as he knelt beside the fire, rearranging the logs, not to stoke it, just to make it burn prettier. You ever make bread? Silas asked. Suddenly, the boy looked up, shook his head. Well, Silas grunted, rising, let's ruin some together. They did. The first loaf came out like a stone. The second, slightly less so. The third, well, they both ate it without complaint. And that was progress. Later that evening, as the fire dimmed and the world turned dark again, Silas leaned back in his chair. The boy lay on the floor beside the stove, one hand resting near the flame like he needed to know it would still be there in the morning. Silas stared at the ceiling, at the smoke stains and the cobwebs he hadn't bothered to clear in years. He realized something. The house didn't feel bigger now. It didn't feel emptier, either. It just felt awake, as if the place had been holding its breath, waiting. It was near dusk when the silence broke. Not with a storm, not with shouting, just the steady rhythm of hooves pressing snow. Silas heard it first. He always did. He was splitting kindling out back. Hands slow and practiced. The boy was inside, drawing something in the soot on the hearthstone with the tip of a twig. The sound didn't belong. No mail came up this far. No neighbors. No one who didn't need to. Silas stood still, axe resting on the stump. The wind had died just enough to let sound travel true. One rider, moving slow, not rushed, not lost, someone who meant to be here. He wiped his hands on his coat and stepped around the side of the cabin. The horse appeared first. Big, gray, the kind bred for distance. Not flash. Then the man, middle-aged, narrow-shouldered, clean coat, didn't look cold, didn't look friendly either. When he reached the porch, he didn't dismount. "Evening," he said. Silas didn't answer. The man glanced toward the door. "I heard there's a boy up here." Silas didn't move. "He's not yours." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Didn't say he was. A long pause settled between them, stretched thin by wind and unspoken history. "I just ask questions," the man continued. "People get nervous when someone vanishes in the middle of a storm." Silas tilted his head. "Didn't vanish." He knocked. The man nodded slowly, reins still in hand. "You plan to keep him?" Silas looked at the horse, then back at the man. "Not how it works." "Then how does it work?" Silas didn't blink. "He stays if he wants." The man exhaled through his nose. "Some folks think that's stealing. Some folks don't know the difference between keeping and sheltering." The wind picked up again, gentle but sharp, the kind that carried meaning. From behind the door, the boy's voice came, soft but clear. "Tell him I'm not leaving." The stranger's eyes flicked past Silas. Just once. Then he clicked his tongue, turned the horse, and rode off the way he came. No threats, no name, just a trace of something left behind in the snow, unease. Inside, the boy had returned to the hearth. Silas stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Who was it?" the boy asked. Though he already knew. "Someone looking for a story," Silas said. "Didn't find it." The boy nodded once. Then, after a moment, he added quietly, "I don't want to go back." "You won't," Silas said. And neither of them spoke again that night. But when Silas placed the last log on the fire, he noticed something new. The boy had drawn a picture in the ash, a house, a man, and beside him, a smaller figure holding a flame. He didn't ask about it, but he left it untouched. Because some drawings don't need erasing. They just need time. The next morning came without birdsong. The sky was pale, almost white, and the trees stood still, like they were listening. The boy didn't speak during breakfast. He stirred his oats without eating. Eyes unfocused, breath shallow. Silas didn't push. He poured 2 cups of weak coffee, one for himself and one for the table. Left it there in case the boy reached for it. He didn't. Instead, he sat near the fire, knees pulled close, and watched the flames like he was trying to see something behind them. After a long time, he spoke. "My name's not Eli." Silas didn't look up from the wood he was carving. "Okay." The boy blinked. "That's what they called me. But it wasn't mine." Silas nodded once, slowly. "You don't have to tell me what it is." The boy rubbed his palms together. "I had a sister. She used to hum when she cooked. I can't remember her face, just the sound." Silas set the carving knife down. The boy kept going, voice thin. "There was a room, no windows. They said it was safe. But safe doesn't smell like bleach." A silence followed. Not heavy, not rushed, just space. "I didn't mean to run," the boy said. "It just happened. My feet kept going." Silas leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes. That's what surviving looks like." The boy didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He just sat there, still and hollow. Silas didn't offer comfort. He didn't say it would be okay. He just stood, poured the cold coffee into a pan, and reheated it on the fire, quiet, steady, like nothing needed fixing, only warming. When he set the mug in front of the boy looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten where he was. He took the mug with both hands, sipped, and for a moment, his shoulders eased. That evening, they walked the ridge. Snow had crusted over in thin layers, cracking softly beneath their boots. The world felt open up there. Like nothing could sneak up on them. Like even the past would need permission to enter. The boy asked, "Did you ever lose someone?" Silas nodded. "Yes." "Did it get better?" "No," he said, then paused. "But it got quieter." The boy thought on that for a while. And then, just as they reached the edge where the wind met the sky, he whispered, "I think my name was Micah." Silas didn't answer right away. He just looked at the horizon, then at the boy. "All right," he said, "then that's who you are." Micah smiled, barely, but it was real. And that night, for the first time, he slept without the blanket wrapped all the way around his shoulders. It was snowing when she arrived. Not the heavy kind that blinds and howls, but soft flakes that float like ash, piling gently on the branches and fence rails. The kind of snow that asks permission before it lands. Silas spotted her from the ridge path. A figure moving slow, leaning hard on a crooked stick, wrapped in a coat too thin for winter. Boots uneven, face half hidden beneath a scarf that had long since given up warmth. She didn't look up when he called. Didn't wave. Just kept walking toward the cabin like she'd been here before. Micah was splitting wood when she came into view. He dropped the axe without thinking and stepped back, not in fear. Exactly, but with the wariness of someone who'd once known surprise too well. Silas met her halfway down the slope. "You lost?" he asked, voice steady. The woman shook her head. "No." He looked closer, at her hands. Cracked and red, the way her shoulders sagged. Not from weight, but from remembering how to carry it. "You're not here by accident," Silas said. She didn't answer right away, just looked past him, at the boy now frozen near the porch. "I heard, someone made it up here." Micah didn't move. Silas said nothing. The woman stepped closer, scarf falling away. Her face was drawn, lips cracked, but her eyes, they were wide. Full, like something had come undone inside them. "I had a boy once," she said, almost to herself. "Taken, given, paper signed without looking." Micah's voice came, small. "You remember?" She turned sharply. "I remember your shoes," she said, "one red, one brown. You wouldn't give them up. Said the dirt didn't care if they matched." Silas looked to Micah, who hadn't blinked. His breath fogged in front of him, but his feet stayed still. Then slowly, he nodded. The woman stepped forward like each step cost her something. "I didn't leave you, I swear it. I went back, but they told me you were gone." Micah blinked once. "I was." And then she was holding him. Just like that. Not dramatic, not loud. Just arms around shoulders, fingers in hair. A breath held, then released after years too long. They sat near the fire that night. The three of them. No stories, no catching up. Just heat, and silence, and a boy no longer quite alone. Silas refilled the stew pot. Micah ate every bite. The woman didn't ask to stay. Silas didn't ask her to leave. Some people, he thought, come back when they're ready. Some fires don't need tending, they just wait. And this one had waited long enough. Spring came slowly, not with trumpets or green fields or sudden warmth, but in small shifts, the kind you barely notice unless you've been listening for too long. The ice on the roof dripped a little faster. The woodpile stayed dry one day longer. And in the early hours before dawn, something chirped outside, a bird too stubborn to stay gone. Micah heard it first. He sat up from his cot, rubbed his eyes, and tilted his head toward the sound like it was a language he hadn't heard in years. "They're back," he whispered. Silas nodded from his chair near the fire. "They never really leave, just wait." The woman, still unnamed, was kneading dough in a chipped bowl near the window. She didn't look up, but her hands moved with more rhythm now. Less survival, more presence. She had taken to fixing small things around the cabin. A loose hinge on the porch door. A drafty gap in the chimney. The way she moved wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet labor, the kind you only do when you believe you might still be here next week. That afternoon, Micah found something at the edge of the woods. A robin's egg, cracked, empty. He held the blue shell in his hands like it might still hold breath. Then he brought it inside. placed it gently in a tin saucer beside the fire, and didn't say a word. The woman saw it, wiped her hands, and knelt beside him. "You used to collect stones," she said, voice soft. "Round ones," said they felt like little worlds. Micah didn't smile, but his fingers curled around the saucer. Silas watched from the corner, sipping his tea. He didn't speak, just let the warmth settle around them. Later that night, they sat by the fire, the light flickering off their faces. The woman finally asked, "You got a name, old man?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "Might." She waited. He sipped his tea. "Silas." She nodded, like it was a name she'd always known, just hadn't remembered to ask. Then she looked to Micah. "You want to stay?" Micah didn't hesitate. "Yes." She placed her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Then we'll need to build something. Real this time." Silas set down his cup. "I've got lumber, tools, just been waitin' for more than 2 hands." The woman smiled, not wide, but deep. "Then we'll build in the morning," she said. And outside, the snow began to melt, not in sheets, but in drops, steady, rhythmic, like a heart remembering how to beat. The next morning came soft and gray, sky the color of river stone. There was no sunrise, just a slow lifting of darkness. Micah woke first. He didn't wait for permission. He simply dressed, laced his mismatched boots, and stepped outside. The frost had lost its grip on the grass, and the wind had traded its sharpness for breath. He stood for a moment, letting it move through his hair like a hand that didn't mean to hurt. Silas was already out by the shed, pulling long beams from the snow-dusted stack. His breath clouded as he worked, but his movements were sure. "You ever build anything?" he asked. Without turning, Micah shrugged. "A little fort once, out of broken crates and moss." "That counts," Silas said. The woman joined them just after, sleeves rolled, scarf tucked behind her neck. She didn't ask what needed doing. She picked up a hammer and started clearing space by the side of the cabin. No orders, no hesitation, just 3 people who had been waiting for the same day. They didn't speak much that first morning. The thud of nails, the creak of old boards made new, the scrape of wood against stone. That was enough. Silas showed Micah how to square a frame. The woman measured twice before every cut. And Micah, he learned to trust the weight of his own hands. At midday, they sat on the ground and passed around bread and beans. No one complained it was cold. No one said it should have been more. After, Micah wandered behind the cabin and came back holding a small, flat stone. He placed it at the corner of the new wall. "What's that for?" the woman asked. Micah looked at her. "Marker, so we remember where we started." She smiled. "Then it stays." By evening, one wall was up. Not much, but enough to block the wind. They gathered by the fire, clothes dusty, arms sore, faces pink from cold and effort. Silas leaned back in his chair, one leg stretched toward the stove. "You two work better than most hired hands I've known." The woman chuckled. "You never paid us." "Exactly." He grinned. Micah was quiet, staring at the flames. Then, softly, "It feels like something now." Silas glanced at him. "What does?" "This place," Micah said. "Before, it felt like we were hiding. Now, it feels like we're staying." The fire popped gently in reply. Later, when the others had gone to sleep, Silas stayed by the window. Outside, the moon sat low, casting long shadows across the snow-slick ground. He saw the beam they'd planted, still standing, even in the wind. He thought of all the years he'd kept the fire burning, waiting for something. Though he hadn't known what. Now he did. You don't build for the sake of shelter. You build when someone else wants to help hold up the roof. It came just after noon, under a sky too still to trust. No birds, no wind. Just silence wrapped around the hill like a question waiting to be answered. Silas was oiling the hinges on the cabin door when he heard the hoofbeats again. Not one this time. 3. Slow, deliberate. He stood, wiped his hands, and looked to the edge of the path. Micah saw them too, crouched near the woodpile, face unreadable. He didn't run, didn't speak, Just watched. The woman stepped out from the cabin. Flour dust on her sleeve. The horses came into view, dark shapes against the melting snow. One wore a coat too clean for this country. One held a clipboard. The third didn't dismount. The same man from before. The one who hadn't given his name. They stopped at the edge of the porch. Close, but not close enough for warmth. Afternoon, the man said. Silas nodded. Again. This time's official, the man replied, gesturing toward the one with the clipboard. Paperwork. The woman crossed her arms. For what? Custody claim, he said. Boy's name showed up in a system flagged missing. Someone wants him back. Micah stepped forward now, voice even. I'm not lost. The man looked at him. Almost kindly. Son, it's not up to you. Silas stepped down from the porch. Then it's up to me, he said. The third man, the one who hadn't spoken, shifted in his saddle. His hand rested just above his holster. Silas noticed. So did Micah. So did the woman. This place, the man with the paperwork continued, isn't authorized to house minors. No formal guardianship, no schooling, no oversight. Silas's voice was quiet, but plenty of heat, plenty of food, and not one locked door. That doesn't make it legal. Micah looked up at Silas. Do I have to go? No, Silas said. And then to the men, you can bring your papers, your titles, your polished boots, but this boy is not property. He's not missing, he's here, and he stays if he chooses. The woman stepped beside Silas. You want someone to sign something? She reached inside her coat, pulled out a folded page. I've been his mother longer than your forms have existed. You want a name? Here, take mine. The men didn't leave right away. They lingered, measured, waited to see if fear would bloom. It didn't. Micah didn't flinch. Silas didn't blink. The woman didn't lower her arm. In the end, the men turned their horses and rode back down the trail, their coats collecting dust instead of victory. That night, Micah sat near the fire. Quiet. Silas handed him a cup of warm milk. Still scared? He asked. Micah shook his head. Not scared. He looked at the woman, then back at Silas. Just proud. Silas smiled. Good, he said. That's what we're building with now. The next morning, Micah asked for the axe. Not to split firewood, not to clear brush, but to shape something that would last. Silas studied him a moment, then handed over the tool without a word. It was heavy, older than Micah by decades. The handle smooth from time and use. Micah gripped it with both hands and walked to the far side of the cabin, where the frost had finally receded from the earth. A pile of lumber sat under canvas. Half forgotten, he chose the straightest beam and set it across two stones. Silas didn't follow. He knew the difference between offering help and making someone feel small. The woman watched from the porch, arms crossed, apron still dusted with flour. She didn't speak either, just nodded once when Micah glanced up. He lifted the axe, exhaled, and made the first cut. It wasn't perfect. The blade slipped, the rhythm took time, but the sound, steady, certain, filled the clearing like a heartbeat rediscovered. By midday, the sun had risen high enough to catch the slope. Meltwater trickled down from the ridge. Birds returned to the trees. Micah wiped sweat from his brow and ran his fingers along the edge of the beam. Not smooth, not even, but his. He carved a mark into it with Silas's knife. Not initials, not a name, just a single, slanted line, like a roof over a stick figure. A house. His. That evening, they set the beam together. Silas held one end, the woman braced the other. Micah guided it into place with both palms. Careful, patient. When it settled, the sound it made, wood touching wood, held without force, was quieter than expected. No snap, no strain, just joining. They stood back and looked at it. The three of them, a real corner, a real wall, something made with choice instead of escape. After supper, Micah brought the carving knife back to Silas. Keep it, Silas said. Micah hesitated. You sure? It's yours now, Silas said. You built something. Micah stared at the knife for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the small, cautious kind, but full, quiet, solid, like someone who had stopped waiting to be sent back. That night, he fell asleep by the fire, blanket at his waist, hands open, face turned toward the beam outside. And in his dreams, the house was finished, not because it was safe, but because it was home. Spring gave way to summer like an exhale. The snow left quietly, without ceremony. Green crept up the hill, first in thin blades, then in full blankets. Wildflowers poked through the stone fence as if they'd just remembered how. The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was a home. The new walls stood firm, joined by beams Micah had shaped with his own hands. The roof no longer leaked. The porch had steps now, 3 of them, built wide so no one had to rush inside. The woman, her name was Mara. They learned one afternoon when Micah asked and she finally remembered to say, had planted a row of potatoes near the edge of the woods. Silas let her. He even helped. By midsummer, the townsfolk had heard. Not all of them cared. But some came anyway. An old woman arrived with a jar of honey and a story about her son who'd left long ago and never wrote back. She left the honey and didn't stay long. A traveling tinker knocked one evening with boots to mend and news from the coast. "You still the man who keeps the fire?" he asked. Silas only nodded. The tinker looked past him to the new windows, where Micah was hammering something onto the wall, a small wooden box for birds to nest in. "Looks like you ain't alone no more." "No," Silas said, "not for a while now." Micah grew. Not taller, though that came too. He grew into himself. He laughed more. He asked questions. He stopped bracing every time someone knocked. And slowly, he became the kind of person others sought out, not because they pitied him, but because they could feel he had lived through something and didn't need to prove it. He repaired boots for a boy from the valley. He taught a younger child how to whittle. He carried warm bread across the ridge to a neighbor who'd lost her husband. And one day, he said, almost in passing, "I think I want to stay." Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Micah already knew. That winter, when the first snow fell, Silas lit the fire early. Micah brought in the wood without being asked. Mara brewed tea from herbs she'd grown herself. And in the front window, they hung a small glass lantern, its flame faint, but constant, not as a signal, not a beacon, just a reminder. That light doesn't always have to search. Sometimes it stays, because someone might be coming up the hill, cold and tired, unsure if they're welcome, and if they are, they'll know.